Hey guys, I'm going to show you a bunch of different watercolor techniques that I want you to know of. I have my paper here divided up into about 13 sections because that's how many techniques I want to show you, but you are only going to have to divide yours up into 6 to 8 sections. Try to make it with your tape when you divide your paper up. Try to make it sort of an interesting composition as opposed to just like a checkered board type of pattern, just simple rectangles. This way it kind of will move your eye around the page. This is going to help us learn how to use watercolors the right way, and it's also going to make up a pretty cool piece on its own. All right, so we'll start with the beginning. We'll start with the easy ones. The first two I have on the list here are flat wash and graded wash. Now, the only difference between those are for flat wash, you want to make it look flat. And for graded wash, you want it to look like there's different stuff going on, like it's fading from darker to lighter. So I'm going to start with flat. And I'm just going to try to keep the application even across this little section here. All right, somewhat flat. Now I'm going to move on to a graded wash. Now, with watercolor, I'm going to use a different color. With watercolor, the more water you have mixed in to the paint, the darker the hue is going to be. So if you have less water mixed in, it's going to get lighter. I mean, it's going to be darker. Sorry. Now I'm going to put more water on my brush. And even more. Sometimes, like when you want a really light color, I'll dip my brush in the water, dip it in the paint, and then dip it in the water again real quick before I add it to my paper, just to make sure it's super, super watery. Okay, so flat, graded. I'm going to label these and put them up somewhere in the room for you guys. So you don't have to technically memorize all of this, but you'll have it. All right, dry brush. So for dry brushing, use another color too for this one. Using the same brush, it just hasn't been dipped in the water yet. In fact, it's a little bit crusty. I did put a little bit of water on the paint set though, just because it activates the paint. So now I'm just going to kind of play around. So this is really just experimenting for you guys. I mean, if you don't get, every technique might not be your favorite. Everyone might not look that great, but it'll be fun for you guys to kind of play around with this and see which ones you like. Sometimes to dry your brush, try to see if you can see it, you can just kind of flick your finger on it a little bit and flick the water off. I'm going to combine a couple different, ooh, those are pretty when they're mixed together, aren't they? No. All right. Now, wet on wet, that's one of my favorites. I'm going to use, so for wet on wet, what you do is basically you just paint your section or paper with water first before you even go in there with watercolor. And that's going to make your paper more absorbent. I'm really not using the right paper for this project. But and you see how it sort of seeps out like that? And the same thing with wet on wet, you want to use plenty of water. All right, the next thing I want to show you is bleeding. So for that, we're going to use some tissue paper. You don't need a lot. You just rip off a little bit. You're going to stick that in your water and basically just see what happens when you dab it on there. The color, the pigment from the tissue paper will come off. I'll just put some scraps out for you guys so you guys can kind of experiment with a couple different colors maybe together on one of the bigger sections. Alright. Next one I'm going to do with you guys is rubbing alcohol. Now for this, we'll have a station set up, I think. And you can come over and you can paint your section, and I just kind of want to keep an eye on you guys when you are working with this rubbing alcohol. So you just need a tiny, tiny couple drops. Doesn't smell good. It smells like getting your ears pierced. Okay, so this is another one that's really cool. Crayon and oil pastel resist. You can use either a crayon or an oil pastel for it. Both the wax and the oil are going to resist the water in the paint. There's a nice hair in that. That's lovely. So you can pretty much draw whatever you want in this section. It's okay if you go on your tape because that's going to get taken off anyway. I used to do this with the little kids and they thought it was so magical. But yeah, as you can see, it's going to resist and it'll shine right through. And like I said, these are kind of making up really cool compositions on their own, so keep that in mind as you're choosing colors. I mean, as opposed to just putting a regular old, just one color in a section, you might want to experiment with using more than one color just to make it a little more interesting. Splatter, drip. That's the next one we have here on the list. So I sort of was splattering and dripping, not really even on purpose with the wet on wet, but you guys can experiment carefully with splattering and dripping. You're just going to need a pretty decent amount of water on your brush for this one, and all you really need to do, you don't need to like swing your arms and get it all over the room. You really just need to tap your finger onto it if it's wet enough. This way you'll have more control over it too. Let's see what happens when I just drip some water on top of those. Yeah, see, that's what happens when the if you're not super gentle with the splattering. It's all right though. I kind of like the way it makes it look. What else do we have? So we have overlay, layering. You can do that on like either the flat wash or the graded wash too. Basically what I mean by that is just layering maybe some shapes on top of a section you already painted. You will, however, want it to be a little dry, so maybe definitely go back to one of the first ones you did, like the graded or the flat wash. I'm going to do like a semicircle so it looks like it's sort of going off my section there. Wet shapes next to wet shapes. So rather than waiting for them to dry, you could do some wet shapes right on next to the wet shapes while they're still wet. You guys notice I am kind of avoiding using brown and black a little bit, just because those colors tend to really overpower the other colors, so I don't know. You can use it if you want to. I just like to make mine look a little bit cleaner. Alright, and I have two more I want to show you really. So for this one, I just spoke a little too soon. This one I am going to use black. So I'm going to do a base of a green, like a flat wash basically. And there definitely is some splatter spillage happening, which is totally fine. Alright, so what I'm going to do is put some nice, really wet drops of black, and you really don't need much. I'm just going to do 4. Now I'm going to take my little piece of straw. Before it sinks in, I'm going to stop talking and just do it because you can get a pretty cool effect that way. Yeah, so did you notice I was kind of going from different directions to try to get the stuff to blow in different ways so that it wasn't all just going in one straight line. All right, did I say 2 more before? I meant 3 more. 2 more from here. Okay, so the next one I'm going to do is a pin scratching. So I'm going to do this really fast because I've got a class coming in. Basically, you just take a pin. Please keep track of these pins. Go get the pin when you're ready to use the pin. Use it and then go put it back so these things aren't rolling all over chairs and people aren't sitting on them. So I'm making scratches in my paper. Not really enough to go through or pierce the paper or anything like that, but kind of lightly scratching it up. you can think a little bit more about the textures you're putting in here if you have some more time, which I'm a little short on right now. And kind of play with how the paint is going to sink into the marks you made with the pen. All right, and the last one I'm going to show you is rubber cement resist. This is another one that I want you to do in the presence of me. So the rubbing alcohol and the rubber cement are both going to be used in my presence. So I'm not covering the whole thing with rubber cement. I'm just covering just a couple little dots. I would want to wait for that to dry ideally before I painted on it. But like I said, I don't really have time. Maybe I'll do some more shapes up in my empty ones, like a couple extras while I'm waiting. Now later we're going to go back into these with Sharpie markers, and you can add some black line designs to them, and that's when they really start to look cool. Also, peeling the paint off tends to be a favorite part for a lot of people. Who doesn't love peeling tape? All right, I'm just gonna go ahead and do it, but I don't think it's going to be dry enough to peel off in time for this video to end. So basically what you're going to do is once the rubber cement is dry, you can go ahead and paint over it, and then later on you're going to peel it off, which is another pretty gratifying experience. Notice how I'm getting sloppy because I'm rushing? There's lessons to be learned there. Alright, and later that'll be dry and we can peel it. I'm going to hang on to this, I'm going to label it, and I'm going to hang it up for when you guys get here. And yeah, I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Then we can use these techniques later on when we do some actual watercolor paintings. So I think you'll like it.